I'm Dr. Sophie Messager, and this is the Wisdom Messenger podcast. In this show, I interview pioneers in women's health and personal development about groundbreaking concepts that help women reclaim lost knowledge and restore inner wisdom. By bridging insights from ancient traditions and modern research, we question stale cultural narratives and midwife a new paradigm around birth, life transitions, and women's autonomy. Join me as we delve into stories and studies that empower women to reconnect with their inner voice and live their truth. Tune in as we rediscover what it means to fully trust ourselves and shape our collective future. In today's episode, I'm delighted to host Caroline Leon, a business coach who's transforming how conscious entrepreneurs grow their businesses. Caroline helps coaches, healers, and teachers build sustainable success without resorting to manipulative marketing tactics. Her approach centers on putting people before profits and building authentic connections. If you've ever felt uncomfortable with aggressive marketing techniques, or if you've wondered if there is a more ethical way to grow your business, this conversation will show you that yes, there is another way. Let's dive in. So welcome to this episode of the Wisdom Messenger podcast, and today I'm delighted to host Caroline Leon, who is somebody who specializes in supporting conscious online business and entrepreneurs, such as coaches, healers, and teachers to grow and build sustainable business. And the reason why I'm keen to have Caroline here today is because the whole theme of this season of the podcast is about consciousness. And one of the things I love about you, Caroline, is that you don't use this horrible lizard brain, manipulative, salesy tactics that are so prevalent in the internet today, in the business world today. You know, this whole sort of yucky tactics that people think that this is the only way to grow your business, and what you do is basically help people develop much more ethical way to grow their business in a way that aligns with their values and helps also change the world we live in. So I thought I'd get us started, I'd love to hear about your story, how you got from where you were to where you are now.
Thank you, Sophie. Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to have this conversation with you. Yeah, whenever I get asked this question, I always wonder how far to go back. But yeah, basically, from as early as leaving university, I remember my first job after university. I worked in like PR, public relations, and I remember being asked to write a press release in defense of a chemical plant that wanted to build next to a school. And I remember in that moment, I was like, oh, there are certain things that I'm prepared to do in my work, and there are certain things I'm not prepared to do. And I remember, very quickly realizing that if I was going to do press and media and communications, it had to be for causes that I believed in. And so from there, I always worked for not-for-profit. So I always worked for big charities or not-for-profit organizations, and through a variety, I kind of went on from press and did more project and program management. But it was always for causes that I believe in, because for me, it was always important. Can't totally say why, but it's always been important for me to do something that matters, that has a positive impact. And then about, where are we now? 14 years ago, I was working for a big charity up in London. I was a program manager, and I just had this gnawing sense of the work that I was doing wasn't really benefiting the people we were supposed to be helping. There was a lot of, red tape and bureaucracy and waste. And I also remember I was living in London, and sitting on the underground train and looking around and thinking, we are the 1%. We are the richest people in the world. These are the people in rush hour traffic, in London, going to their corporate jobs, and everybody is miserable. Everybody. Everybody just looked miserable.
Mm.
And so I had this kind of, these two things sort of converge at the same time for me to be like, okay, I don't really feel like the work I'm doing is actually helping the people it's designed to help. And I'm living in this kind of, world where, the people who seem to be, who should be the richest, who are the most privileged people, some of the most privileged people in the world, and we seem the most miserable. I know I felt miserable on my daily commute on the London Underground. And so I kind of had this big moment, where I was like, okay, it's not this. I've spent my life working towards this kind of definition of success that I believed in. I did everything right, went to university, got the jobs, got the, and it's not this. This can't be it. This can't be my purpose in life. So I kind of went on a journey of discovery. I looked into lots of things that I might want to do. I looked into social work. I looked into, being working with kids and youths, like a youth worker. I looked into coaching, looked into teaching. And I knew I wanted to travel, I wanted to see the world. So I basically, in the end, decided, okay, coaching is what is the direction I want to go in. I got very fascinated with personal transformation and that personal growth journey. And then I left the UK in 2012. I went traveling. I built my business on the road. And in building my business, I went through what everybody goes through of this, like, oh my God, this is what I have to do to build a business. And I was really lucky to work with an incredible coach very early on in my business journey, who really helped me see the value of connection, the value of being of service, kind of really helped me to tune out the noise of, you've got to be doing ebooks and courses and passive income and all of that stuff. It was very focused on being conversation, being of service to people, offering value. And that was a decade ago. I worked with him, and then my journey just went on and on. And my understanding of things like conscious business and ethical business just deepened. I learned more, found wonderful teachers like George Carl, who we both admire and respect, Tad Hargrave, and my understanding of what it means to do business in a more ethical way just developed, and now here I am. That's what I do. That's what I support others with. Yeah, so that's the journey in a nutshell.
You have a strapline, Caroline.
Yes.
Would you like to share it and
Yes.
explain what you mean by the strapline?
Yes. So when we change the business, we change the world.
Mm.
Is the big idea behind my business. And I think what I mean by that, or how that came to me, is this idea that when we think about what's wrong with the world, not everybody will agree to this, but my kind of people, when we think about what's wrong with the world, we think about profit driven big business, greed, consumerism, extraction of the earth's resources in the for profit, for the wealth of the minority, of the few. And so I just became obsessed with this idea of, imagine if, in some of the worst businesses, that are doing the most damage to the planet and to people, are the most profitable. They are the ones that, have the monopoly, and I just became obsessed with this idea that if imagine a world, for example, where the most profitable businesses were those that operated with the highest levels of integrity.
Yeah.
If the businesses that put people before profits, that prioritize the well-being of the world, of people and the planet, were the ones that were the most profitable, we'd live in a completely different society. It wouldn't just be, we'd have more, nice organic shops. It would be a completely different planet. And so what I became fascinated with as a business coach for smaller entrepreneurs is this idea that I work with lots of business owners who are doing incredible good in the world, trying to facilitate transformation and healing and change for people, but they don't know how to succeed without using tactics that compromise all of those values. So for me, it was just like, oh, wow. When I started to realize that there is another way, and I, grew my own business in that way, and then started to support other people, it just became this, this link between the world and the way we do business, just became so strong for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wonder actually if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit more about what the traditional
Yes.
non-ethical business tactics are, because both you and I know, with, like, for me a few years ago when I first discovered George Cow, it was like having the wool pulled out
Yeah.
of my eyes. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Because the main, I mean, I would say, I don't know if you agree, but 90% or more than what people see when they go online, especially Facebook ads and things like that, is all operating under that same
Mm.
manipulation model. And you find the same when you go in the shop, so buy a
Yeah.
car or any of those things. And then I suspect that most people don't even, it's not even within their consciousness that
Yes.
there's a different way. So I think it's important first to
Yes. Yeah.
explain examples of what the tactics are and why they're so
Yes.
damaging for conscious solopreneurs, especially.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I'll just say, you described finding George as the world being pulled from your eyes. I always describe it as finding an oasis in the desert.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh my goodness. So and sometimes people have that reaction to my work now, and it's very nice to support people to have that kind of, awakening, that awareness. So I mean, if you think about it, and it's interesting, I haven't yet seen it. I don't know if you've seen, but there's a documentary on Netflix at the moment called, I think it's called Buy Now, and it's going to go into all of the tactics that traditional marketing, and more in terms of big business than what we're talking about here today in terms of the smaller businesses. But it's just I mean, it has been studied, and it's not known generally. We don't know when we go into a shop or we watch an advert or what has gone into, manipulating us into buying. But basically, most marketing is designed to get the sale at all costs.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter whether or not the sale is the right thing for the person, the customer. So yeah, some examples in terms of like the kinds of businesses, our kind of business, and the kind of businesses that I support. Pressure, pressure to buy is the big one. So we see lots of things. We see things like countdown timers. We see things like uh, discounts that will disappear in an hour. I mean, and this one always makes me laugh when you see, free webinar, and you watch it, free live webinar,
Yeah.
and then you have to choose your slot. You've seen those where it's like, and then it's like it's a recording, which really makes me like, how can you call this live? And then then right after the end of the recording, then they'll say, now you've got 30 minutes, 45 minutes to take advantage of this, offer. And then the offer goes away forever. And all I have to do is actually refresh the page or go on a different browser, and I can get the thing straight again. So it's lie. I mean, it's lies.
And
Lots of
it's
it is
a
just,
scarcity, which I
yeah,
find,
yeah,
again, I don't think people are conscious of that. It appeals to the lack. It appeals to
yeah.
the
The
idea that
fear,
it's
the
not
fear of
enough.
missing out. Yeah,
Yeah.
the fear of missing out.
Yeah.
And we play on the vulnerable, those tactics play on the vulnerable. So, especially in my world as a business coach, where people are trying to make a livelihood, and they're, maybe they're really struggling to get their business off the ground, or that is a ripe environment to manipulate. So that's where people will come to me and say, I spent 10K on a program that promised me 10K months in
6 months.
6 weeks.
In a
Yeah,
week.
exactly.
Like tomorrow.
Um, and I mean, I still see them now, and it shocks me every time. And I have to sometimes stop myself and write in the comments, how can you make these promises? So, but that's everywhere. I do believe that people are getting wiser to them, but at the same time, that's probably because I spend time with the people who have got wise. They're looking
Yeah,
in
I
a different
think that's why I
direction.
thought it was important to define, because I think once you've been, because for me it's been about 5 years now, or four to
Yeah,
5 years where I've started operating differently, and now I'm around people like you and George and
yeah,
Tad and lots of other people that you bring together.
yeah,
have forgotten.
Yeah.
See what I mean? But also once you've actually been once you've wised up to these tactics, you see them coming from a mile. But
Yeah.
I just can't help but share this example because it's such a stark opposite of how you work and how
Yeah.
ethical coaches work. Is I worked with someone. I made a mistake early in my work, went out of desperation to work with someone who I knew wasn't aligned, but I couldn't find anyone better. And one of the things I've never forgot this person said is, your client's financial situation is not your concern. Whereas, for instance, I can see that you, in your program, your yearly mastermind program, you ask a question about it, whether it would be a hardship,
Yeah.
or I can't remember how you phrase it, but you ask
Yeah.
people whether they can afford this without,
Yeah.
and I remember I was very grateful when you shared with me the work of Mark Silver, who has some kind of freebie that explains, and I wonder if you might want to share about that.
Yeah.
Because I remember
Yeah.
you told me that freebie, that reading that had a big impact on you.
Huge. Yeah. Yeah, it's called Don't Buy Now. And it's somewhere hidden on his website. I downloaded it years ago, but it basically runs through all of those tactics. And specifically lays them out in a way that now I'm similar to you. It's like, doesn't everyone know these tactics? I don't, but I remember when I first discovered it. So there's he talks about things like that pressure, the manipulation to buy. I'm so much more now versed in the opposite, that they come to me more easily. So if I think about, for example, I talk about slowing down the sale. So one of the things I think Mark talks about, don't buy, that's the whole thing, don't buy now, buy now. Even just the buy now is it's the button we put on our websites. It's so we're so used to it, we don't even see it. So another example, and I don't know if I got this from Mark's freebie or not, but because it's been years, is charm pricing. So people talk about 197 or 199 or 99. And again, I mean, I'm always mindful not to be judgmental about some of the tactics. I always say to my clients, if you want to use them, use them. It doesn't, but just be aware. I just want you to, be aware, because sometimes we don't know, why does everybody put 199? Well, the studies have shown that people look to the left, the furthest left number. So when they look at a price and they see 199, they see one, and they think 100, 100 and something, when in actual fact it's 200. We've just taken a dollar off or a pound off. Or so again, and I get lots of pushback on this one from people, because like, well, everybody does it, and it's like, it's fine, but be aware that the reason for it is to manipulate the buyer into thinking they're getting something for cheaper than it actually is. Does it work? Yes, it does work. I had a client recently say to me, but I really lose sales when I don't use those numbers. And that's why I always say, I never judge people. It's like, it's got to feel right for you. I'm just aware. For another example that I learned from George was like lead magnets. I remember when he was like, don't use lead magnets, which was such an epiphany to me, because his argument was, and I really believe this, is it's not free. If you say to somebody, I'll give you something, but you have to pay me with your email address.
Yeah.
Now that might not be money, but actually our email address these days is, quite a commodity. Yeah. So
same with sales funnels. I mean, I hate the terms, all of them. They give me the heebie-jeebies. For me, the biggest transformation in this practice was going from a place where I felt I would get the yuck every time I reached the point in a webinar where I mentioned a paying product. But after starting to work with those things, because you're very transparent, you say up front, I'm going to talk to you about that. And then all the yuck is gone. And you just very much like practice non-attachment by reminding people that. The other thing that also popped back in my mind is those free webinars that you find everywhere, and somebody managed to talk to you about something for an hour without telling you anything.
Anything. Yeah.
Um, that really blows my mind that
Yeah.
people,
And
yeah,
for sure there's a formula. I mean, it's been a long time since I went to webinars about webinars, for example, or listened to information about how to get sales through web. But for sure there's some kind of formula, which is like, spend X amount of time qualifying, sharing why you're qualified to, to be the person to listen to. You have that bit at the beginning, then have basically 10 to 20 minutes of fluff, nothing that you didn't really already know, maybe one thing that's like, oh, that's interesting, and then it's the pitch.
yeah.
And so, one of the things that I reclaim as a conscious business owner is the word free. If I say I'm going to give you something for free, I want it to be really valuable. I want it to be, when I do a free, I won't even call them webinars because I have a visceral reaction to the word webinar because of so many bad experiences of just feeling like I'm wasting my life. I use the word workshop because typically when I do run, what might be called a free webinar, it is a work. I give a lot. I'll give a lot of value. I'll give, yeah, that issue of basically presenting something as free and valuable, but really what it is a thinly veiled sales pitch. That's what we see a lot. I had it recently and it was such a shame because I actually went to the webinar because I was interested, but the email that came through, it was like, 3 principles that I have followed, in my career to build a multi-six-figure business, and and it went on and on and on. And you're like, what are the 3 principles? What are the 3 principles? But no, you had to be on the free webinar to get the 3 principles, and then you had to have been on the webinar to get the discount, to get the the meaty program, which was a significant part of the webinar. And my thing is like, give the 3 principles. Of course you're going to go deeper in the live training, but don't make, but that's how. And people will say, well, I'll get more people on the webinar that way. You may, but what you do is you erode trust, because now, if I have to, oh man, I've got to go onto this webinar to get this, to know if it's even valuable for me to go on it, because you're not giving me enough information to make the decision. Is this something I want to know more about? Now you've annoyed me a little bit and I don't feel, very warm towards investing in your program or product. So for me, what a lot of these tactics do, whilst they might work in the short term, and this is what I hear from a lot of people, like, but they work. I will get more people if I don't give the answer away, or I will, get more people on my free training if I don't, if I hide the pitch, or you erode trust. And someone might buy once, but they'll regret it. And I work with those people on a regular basis. I work with people who have invested in programs that weren't a fit because they were manipulated to do so. And they come to me. I mean, I've had people in tears on calls many times, feeling shame that they were so stupid to believe that they could make, 6 figures in 6 weeks. And so that's a big part for me of conscious business, is the cultivation of trust. And not, I mean, I remember once following again a free training. It was a free training on, I think they called it ethical sales. And one of the things they talked about was, how did she put it? Was it manufactured empathy? It was something where it was like, the whole ethos, because this is the scary thing in the industry now. A lot of people have cottoned on to the fact that if you say it's ethical, if you say it's conscious, if you say it's heart-centered, people, there's a whole section of the audience that are going to be drawn to that, because, and then I see things all the time under that guise that are the old way of doing things, but just being described as so this free training in ethical sales was all about sales scripts and creating empathy, but in a fabricated way. It was, so there's a lot, and the key is, I think, in traditional, the key distinction that I make, the priority is the sale, not the person.
Yeah.
And that's the key distinction for me between traditional business and conscious business.
Mm.
You prioritize the person. And in doing so, you prioritize you as the business owner, because the people I work with don't want to manipulate their people.
Yeah.
They don't want to employ these tactics. They feel gross and icky trying to do them. In many cases, they don't even do consistent marketing because it feels so icky and gross. But they're not succeeding in business because they can't bring themselves to do those strategies. And then even if they do, they don't work because there's this huge resistance. So yeah, I'll stop there because
No, it's very interesting to hear you say that, because one of the concerns I have is I see very plain as day, because the people who are using those techniques are often very good at over promising amazing results, and there's a lot of desperate people. You know, I've heard you say that a lot of people you work with are often the world's best kept secret. They over deliver, they're amazing at the work they do, but because they're not good at promoting themselves, they don't find it easy to make a living out of their work, or, you know, grow their business. And then because the other part is the other side of the story, you know, the people who use manipulative marketing are often very, very skilled at using stuff that talks to people's fear, stuff that talks to, in fact, I'd go as far as saying stuff that talks to people's trauma. This is really big and scary, that because it's good getting to where you know people are in pain, and talking to that in a way that's completely untrue. And I think most people who are out there, they're not aware that this is what's being done to them. And it, of course, it is very tempting when somebody's a really good wordsmith and presents something to somebody who's desperate that promises such amazing results. Both you and I know this is not the reality.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, for the benefit of your audience, that the best way to spot when that's happening to you is if you're left feeling like the only way to get the answer is to sign up for an expensive program. So one of the big shifts that I help my clients make is give the answer, you know, give the answer, give the 3 principles. And then if you're like, oh yeah, I really like the sound of those principles and I would love help integrating those principles into my work, yes, I'll sign up for the program. But if I can't even get my eyes on what the principles are until I sign up for the expensive program, you know, this is the issue. So whenever I'm in a situation, I mean, and I, you know, as a new business owner myself 10, 12 years ago, I was subject to all of this manipulation. And, you know, there's a feeling, and it happens to me, you know, it happens to me sometimes where, you know, it's like, oh gosh, there's a secret I don't know about. There's something, there's a magic pill. I mean, now I'm so immune to it, obviously, but you know, for a long time, it was like, if I feel anxious when I'm reading someone's marketing materials, if I feel like, oh my goodness, if I don't sign up for this, I won't succeed, I won't get the transformation that I seek, I know I'm being manipulated. I know I am. Because a conscious business owner, an ethical marketer doesn't do that. You know, it will give you as much information as possible to make the right decision for you. And what I try to do with all of my marketing is give you the answers. I want you to get as much from a blog post as I could possibly give you, you know, and I know you do the same, in an hour conversation with me. I want to give you everything. And I'm here if you want to go deeper. I'm here if you need that hand holding, if you need that, you know, this is how we tailor it directly for your business, for your needs, for your situation. And so people don't have us, I don't think, I mean, and sometimes it will happen to me, people are like, oh, and I'm like, listen, don't panic, I'll run it again, or I'll, you know, there'll be other ways to, I will actually reassure people not to make a purchase out of fear of missing out. I mean, because I have it at this time of year, I'm recruiting for a program I run next year. And so people are like, oh, if I don't sign up, you know, and I don't want to take you if that's where you're at, you know, it's got to feel like a full body yes. And if it doesn't, don't worry. I'll be doing lots of things next year. There's lots of other ways you can engage with my work. That is not the be all and end all. My program is not going to save your life. I'll do what I can to help you. But so, and of course, traditional marketing doesn't do that. It doesn't want to reassure you that you don't need the product. It does the opposite. It wants to make you feel like you are inadequate without it, that you cannot succeed without it.
That's very scary concept.
It is. And we're bombarded with that 24/7 on all fronts. I mean,
so I'd love to hear you take us through the principle of what you do instead. You've already mentioned the importance of, talking to the person rather than trying to make the sale. You want to, maybe, I know you've got a certain number of principles. What would feel better, to talk about those principles or to just generally explain?
Let's just see what comes. But for me, a couple of things that come to mind. So yes, putting the person before the sale, which is easy to say, but what does it mean?
Look like,
and for me, it's that, I'm in, like I say, because I'm in a launch at the moment and I'm having a lot of sales conversations. I really, I said the words this week, in fact, twice, 2 examples, practical examples in sales calls. One, I said, I'm not sure I'm the right coach for what you're trying to do, because I'm very practical and maybe you need someone who's more visionary. I actually said those words and she was extremely grateful, because I just felt it. I felt like, I don't know, I'd love to work with her. I would love to work with you. And, but I don't know if I'm the right person. That's putting the person before the sale. Another example was yesterday, someone considering my program. And I said to her, my worry is you might be overwhelmed for the stage of business you're at. You might find it overwhelming. I don't know. And let me show you as much as I can for you to make that, to be able to make that decision. I don't know what your capacity for overwhelm is or not, but that would be my concern. So these are things that you would never get taught in traditional sales. Like, you're taught to overcome the objection. You're taught to say, if someone expresses, oh, I feel a bit overwhelmed, for you to be like, well, here's all the reasons why you won't be overwhelmed. Here's all. I do the opposite. I do the absolute opposite. And it was something I learned years ago, actually, which was this idea of questioning the yes. When someone is like, oh, yes, I'm in, I want to, it's like, slow the sale down, and ask what makes this a yes? Something that I started to do years ago in my sales calls, which felt so alien compared to what I'd been taught, was, why me? Why do you want to work with me as your coach? What has you choosing me over somebody else? I really want you to think about that. I really want you to ask yourself, why do you think Caroline is the best place coach to work with? When people can't believe it. I mean, it's just unheard of in sales calls for that to happen. So immediately, I think what happens is trust is formed. People know that you are not in that call trying to get the sale no matter what. You genuinely want the right decision for the person, because the right decision for the customer is the right decision for you as a business owner, ultimately.
I think you said something very important a few minutes back as well, which is when you said, I'm not sure it's the right time, you might become overwhelmed. It's one of the things I've noticed. People who are in the manipulative thing never ever try to find out whether you have the space in your life, the time and the space to dedicate a certain number of hours a week to your business. I've heard you say things like the time you work in your business and the time you work on your business. And that's something, again, it's very unethical to sell somebody a program if that person is, I don't know, a single mother of 3 kids who's struggling to make ends meet and has no time whatsoever. And how is she gonna, like you say, not get even more overwhelmed if she's trying to find a time to apply this magic recipe?
And we see it a lot. We see those concerns that people have. I mean, I remember years ago, and I'll never forget it, considering a program when I was I'd paid some attention, and so the business owner kind of hunted me down and was like, let's get on a call. And so I did. It was like, okay, but I was 8 months pregnant with my first son. And the program started you know, the month he was going to be born, or, you know, and I was like, I just don't think it. And she wouldn't let it go. I mean, she pushed and she pushed and she pushed and followed up. And I mean, in the end, I just, you know, I don't think I went as far as blocking her, but I just stopped responding to any messages. But there was absolutely no acknowledgement or even concern about the fact that I was about to give birth to a baby. And of course, you know, the last thing I needed to do was be in an expensive, you know, business program. So, and those things happen all the time. They happen all the time. It's practically unheard of, I think, for people to put the person before the sale. You know, it's a huge, you know, I remember also being taught years ago, get the credit card out on the call before they can change their mind. You know, get the sale before they hang up the phone. So that's one big principle for me. Another one I think that comes to mind is, and this is maybe more specific to marketing, is to be truly transparent and honest. You know, someone said to me recently, they asked in my free Facebook group, how do I sell my workshop without being like salesy and I said, just sell, you know, just be clear. You know, my advice is always like, be clear that you are selling. Because how often do we get something and it's like, you know, have you struggled with this thing? You know, it's this kind of, you know, going into the pain points, like really, and maybe sometimes it's presented as content. You think, oh, this is an article or a piece or a video that's going to give me an answer. But what it does, and this is a phrase I learned a few years ago, maybe from Lauren, who's an amazing ethical copywriter, you know, the idea of punching the bruise. So there's, of course, as business owners, we have to talk about the struggle. We have to identify the problem that we solve, but there's doing that. And then there's this kind of over egging of the pain points and this idea of punching the bruise. So you know, it's what you said about touching on the trauma is exactly that. It's like we don't just reference your pain point. We get you into a state of pain, and then the only way to alleviate your pain is my offer, you know. So again, in marketing, and one of the principles, you know, that I adhere to in my work of transparency is don't conflate content, valuable content, when you are maybe providing some advice or some guidance with what I call copy, sales copy. Yeah. These days on the internet, you don't know whether you're reading sales copy or you're reading content. It's so mixed together that sometimes you think you're reading something useful and then you get to the end and it's like, oh, I didn't get an answer. The answer is behind the paywall. The answer is the program. It is the expensive offer. So, you know, a big thing that I teach is that if you're selling something, you know, I will put it right at the top of if I've put in a post on social media about a workshop I'm running, I'm like, I'm announcing my workshop. It's the first line. So that if nobody wants to go to a workshop, if nobody is interested, they'll just move on. There isn't this, you know, bait and switch that we talk about. It's like, you know, I'm going to reel the person in, get them hooked, get them like, oh, this is my issue, and then hit them with the sale. I don't hit people, but like I put the sale at the top. It's like, I'm selling. I've got something. I like to think of gentle invitations. I like to think of and I think this is worth mentioning, because for people who start to lean towards, and maybe you went through this, I know I did, towards a more ethical approach and like, oh, there is another way. They kind of go so far that it's like, I don't want to sell at all. I just want to be of service. I just want to give all of my content away. I just want to, you know, be generous and serve people. I don't want to sell at all. I don't want to bother people. I don't want to bombard people. And I always have this, you know, it always makes me smile, because it's like the people who talk like that, the people who are severely underselling themselves, they've swung so far the other way that no one even knows what they do. You know?
I wonder if, you know, because the marketing, the manipulative techniques are so prevalent, if people almost need to heal from that. You know, in the process of learning that there's another way, they need to also understand what's been done to them.
Yeah.
and how to slowly like see it for what it is. And then I don't think you can go overnight from having it
No.
in that space of yuck to go to a place where you trust, because there's also a lot of trial and error on what feels true to you.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear more about what you tell people. Yeah, I think you have a couple of principles that you think are the top ones to tell the people that work with you to do instead, of to connect with their audience.
Um, yes, I mean, I'm not sure which ones you're referring to specifically, but I mean that piece at that I've just mentioned, that transparency, and being honest about the sale, and yeah, I think for me, a big one is cultivation of trust.
Yeah.
So just, I mean, again, this is just maybe useful information around the marketing side. We're often taught in order to get the sale, we have to have like the perfect copy, we have to have we have to be able to describe what we do perfectly, and a big thing that I teach is, talk about demonstrating expertise, like allowing people to experience you, as a practitioner, before they invest. So generosity is a huge principle of mine. There's a wonderful book, I don't know if you've read it, called The Go Giver.
No.
It's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it to anyone watching, by Bob Berg, and I think somebody else, but he's the main author. And the idea is it's a parable, and it's a play on the go-getter.
Mm,
And it's all about generosity in business.
yeah.
So, a huge principle that I share with my clients and teach is around being generous with our knowledge and with our expertise. And that doesn't mean giving everything away with no boundaries. It doesn't mean burning ourselves out, but it means that we don't hold everything behind a paywall. We don't make people pay $10,000 before they get anything from us, So generosity is a huge one for me. One of the biggest ways in which I grew, this is my second business. I was a life coach first of all, and then transitioned to a business coach later on, was with gift sessions, was with, allowing people to experience me as a coach. I mean, and I still, even with my work together calls today, I'm more likely to coach than I am to sell, to go into this place of like, trying to sell to people. And so, but it's really interesting because over the years also I've had pushback on that. So I remember one client saying to me, "Oh, I've got a friend in business who thinks I'm crazy to do these gift sessions, to give these sessions away to me. I don't value my worth, and I'm not, And I said to my client, does your friend have a successful business? And she said, yes, the business is very successful. And I said, how? How is she succeeding in business? And my client said, well, she's got an incredible podcast. She makes podcast episodes every single week. She spends so much time on her podcast. And I turned around and I said to her, that's her gift session. That's her generosity, that's her time. And
Yeah.
that's great. If she loves to do, I love being on podcasts, but it doesn't appeal to me to have my own podcast. It doesn't appeal to me to spend hours on Instagram making reels and things. What appeals to me is sitting with a person and doing what I can to support them. And that for me is the best way I've known over the years to sell my services. Now I have an established business. I have lots of ways people find me, my content, colleagues sending people my way, word of mouth referrals. There's lots of things working for my business. But in the beginning, I had, there was this pressure to, I have to have the perfect website with the perfect images, with the perfect words. And I've got to have the perfect offer and the perfect way of describing that offer. And then once I have all of those things in place, the doors will open and all of the clients will come. And of course, that's not how it works. And so, going back to the principles, there's, for me, what's born out of this idea of, when I'm in connection with people, when I actually serve people deeply, not only do I feel fulfilled as a business owner, does it fulfill my purpose? Because I meet many coaches who are like, I've got, I went into coaching because I wanted to help people. I've spent thousands studying coaching, and now I'm sat here and there's no one. It's crickets. I've got no clients, and so I talk a lot about, if you give gift sessions, for example, you're practicing generosity, you're practicing your skills, you are fulfilling your purpose of supporting people and helping people in the world. And when you do all of those things, because you're in connection and you're being generous and you're serving people, then the clients will come. You're much more inclined to get more clients.
Yeah.
So those principles for me, of generosity, service, and connection, over the years, my message has evolved, and over the last few years, I'm like, oh my goodness, it really is all about conversation. Everything I do and everything I teach my clients is about being in connection and relationship with others, because so many business owners are typically sat behind the screen tweaking their web pages and wondering why nobody's buying their thing, and because they're not out in the world building relationships and being of service.
Yeah.
Being of service to the world.
And I find that very interesting to hear you say that, because I think that this is also something that will come much more naturally to people who are trying to grow their business, because what they are naturally good at is nurturing people, caring, holding the space and all this kind of stuff, and the understanding that being in that space is how you hone your skill.
Yeah.
And the other thing, when you were talking about content, like one of the things I've noticed very clearly is, for instance, when you share an article, there's actual helpful stuff in there, right? You mentioned in a class that I attended with you about the importance of nurturing your audience.
Yeah.
And then after that, you mentioned that, I went and looked at stuff that appears on my Facebook feed, and I've noticed that some of the people, including someone I've worked with in the past, but some of the people who are doing the manipulative technique, they never do that.
No.
Because it's always a sales post. There's no nurturing post. It's always a sales post only. So, that thing, that the balance of that, how you and George does the same, that say you do a lot more sharing of free content and then a gentle sales post every once in a while, and not being surprised when that gets less traction, because people are more interested in interacting with discussions and content that is actually for the sake of sharing. I find that really fascinating. And then what you were sharing about, the perfect website, and I know lots of my friends are stuck there too. And I've also seen the opposite, which is people who come from a marketing background, have no knowledge, no depth of knowledge in the field, but create a very shiny, very appealing website for very expensive product. And I've actually interacted with some of those people in my field and realized they are charlatans. They have no experience of what they're actually trying to teach. It's just all about the fluff. Absolutely fascinating when you start to look at that, because it's very easy to pick when you start interacting with someone whether they have depth of experience in the field or not.
I mean, that's a really brilliant point, and it comes back to, like, for me, the principle of integrity. Like, that's top of the list for me in terms of my personal and my professional values, is integrity. And one of the things that I rail against in the industry is this idea that everything is premium, everything is luxury, everything is high ticket. It drives me insane. And so I remember, it's happened to me many times over the years where somebody's applied to work with me. I asked for their website and their social media. I go, it's a highly polished, professionally branded website. Their coaching packages are 5K minimum. And everything is beautiful and, glossy and perfect. They've obviously had a professional photo shoot done. And now I don't question it because it's happened so many times. But in the early days, I was like, why is this person coming to me? How can I help this person if they've got this established business with these? And I get on a call with them. They haven't sold a single package, a single one. They bought into the hype of, you need the perfect website, you need the perfect copy, you need the perfect pictures, you need the perfect package. And once you have all of those things, then the people will come. And they didn't. They didn't come.
it's all, I can't find the word right now, but you know, the opposite, it's all shiny powder,
Yeah.
as opposed to connection, as opposed to depth. It's all yeah, appearance,
Superficial,
appearance
superficial.
over substance, you know. It's,
Mm.
and here the problem is people who are in the conscious field, and I mean genuinely, because
Yeah.
sure, when you share that these words are being used without
Yes.
truth, I sure see that too, right?
Yeah.
But people who are really, you know, they can't do that because it's going to harm the trust and the relationship with their
Yeah.
clients. And I wonder,
Yeah.
Caroline, sorry,
No, no, go.
I wonder if you might actually share, because of what you just said, some of the biggest challenge you see the people who come to get, you know, your support, your coaching work, your workshops, your mastermind program, you know,
Yeah.
what do you see as the top, like maybe the top two challenges?
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say, and I think it speaks to this a little bit. I love to use the analogy of dating sometimes when I'm talking about business.
Yeah,
So imagine, there's two people that are trying to find love,
yeah.
and one person spends all their time getting their hair done, going to makeup tutorials, working on their, wardrobe and looking perfect, but never goes on a date, never leaves the house. And then there's someone who doesn't do those things, but goes on dates, every night of the week. Who's gonna find love? And
That's
that's
a
what
very
I
good
yeah.
analogy.
And that's what I think so many business owners do in those things. So the challenge then becomes for people who have been very focused on the appearance of a
Yeah.
successful business is, I think, twofold. One is coming out from behind the screen, leaving the house, going on the dates,
Mm,
actually being in conversation with people. It's scary.
yeah.
It is scary. I had a session yesterday with a client who was tearful about sending her first newsletter. It felt so vulnerable
Mm,
to actually expose her ideas to, for the first time. I remember the first blog post I ever published.
same.
I did feel like a death. It felt like I was outing myself as, back then I was like everyone's going to think I'm a self-help junkie, and it
Yeah.
felt like the worst thing ever. Now I'm like, I wouldn't mind if people think that, I don't care. But so it's the vulnerable stuff,
Yeah.
because it's very easy to spend hours tinkering with your website and making pretty things on Canva and all of that stuff. What's really hard is actually sharing your point of view in your content, actually reaching out to people and getting in conversations with people, talking to people, coming out from behind the screen and genuinely engage. It's very vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's very vulnerable. But as we know, thanks to Brené Brown, through vulnerability is everything, It's like when we can lean into that vulnerability, that's where true connection resides. That's when we can really start to truly connect with people. So I think that's one of the some people are like dying for it. They just didn't realize. So some people come to me and they're like, oh my goodness, I get to just reach out to people. I get to just talk to people. They love it. For other people, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's a hard challenge. Um,
I think it's very important what you just said here, because when you look at those programs we're talking about, they don't take into account the individual. So I loved hearing you saying you don't like to do reels on Instagram, or what was it, the other thing you said, you not your cup of tea. I
a
can't
web
remember.
like Was it
Huh?
webinars? I don't know. I
Yeah.
can't remember. But
And that's super important, because yes, there are people out there who are on every single channel, but you know, it's really important that the person who starts, especially with that vulnerability you just talked about, because I
mm,
remember publishing my first blog and thinking, oh shit, what if people don't like it first? So I had other people read it to
yeah,
make sure I was, and now I actually really, you know, purposefully put stuff out there that I know is going to be controversial, and that, because a mentor of mine years ago said, you know, if you don't piss people off, you're not saying anything worth saying.
yeah,
But therefore, you know, it's super important that if somebody's more comfortable with a written word, they don't do video. If somebody's more comfortable
yes,
with a video, and all that stuff about people being introverted and extroverted, and what feels true, and started with that rather than having to think you've got to be on TikTok and LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and God knows what else is out there, which
Exactly.
is very overwhelming.
Yes. Well, and so something I want to say to that, which I think is really important, because I talk a lot about people, people before profit. And the assumption is when you hear that phrase that you're talking about the customer, but I mean everybody.
Yeah.
The business owner is as important to me as the customer. So if it feels good to the customer, but it doesn't feel good to the business owner, that's no good either. It can't be. It cannot be that. And this is where, sometimes people hear my approach and they think, well, I'm going to burn out being generous. No, if resentment starts to arise because of what you are given, stop immediately. Do not give more than you are capable of giving. Do not burn yourself out for the sake of other people's well-being, which is another tricky place for my kind of people, because they're so focused on helping people. So it's really important, the approach, conscious business for me is about also, I talk about sustainability, you mentioned it in the intro. When I'm talking about sustainable business, I mean it's a business that you wake up in the morning and want to do and want to do for the next 5-10 years.
Yeah.
Not a business you wake up and think, oh my God, I can't bear another day. I'd rather be working in a 9 to 5, it feels like my old 9 to 5, So that piece that you're saying there, I think is really important. The idea, people come to me all the time, should I be on Facebook or should I be on Instagram? I don't know. Where do you like to be? Which of those platforms do you prefer?
Yeah.
And people are like, but what about my people? And it's like, well, it doesn't matter. Even if all your people are on Instagram, and to be, there's no one niche that's only on one platform. Let's say more of your niche are on Instagram, but you hate Instagram. What's the point? You will not be consistent. You will not show up. You will not, and if you do show up, you will not show up with the right energy or the right intention, because you'll be filled with resentment. And so that people first piece for me to conscious business is it goes both ways. It has to be the business owner and the customer.
Yeah, that's very important to hear that. Yeah, just I love when I heard you say, I don't know which platform you should go on. I also hear the fact that the entire industry is based on the idea that there's an expert guru person out there who knows what's right for you. You don't. Yet you don't work like that. Conscious coaches don't work like that. They're basically trying to help you understand what works for you. And again, that's not spoken. People don't realize they may go into a very expensive program and it just doesn't work for them.
Yeah.
Because it's not. Again, I remember George Carroll saying that from time to time, for fun, he goes and gets interviewed by really famous people who makes like really huge business, so they sell very expensive program, as a potential customer.
Yeah.
And you find that they never ever even bother find out who he is. You go on people's website, I go on people's website, I want to know who I'm going to talk to. And he says they're only interested to sell you the stuff, so they don't want to know who you are, they don't care about your life circumstance. It's really fascinating when you start unlayering all that.
Yes.
How it's at odds with the very essence of the type of business that you want to support, the very essence of, being in service.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and my thing is, if if you do business in a way that feels unsustainable to you, as particularly, the people I work with being change makers, people who want to have a positive impact on the world, you'll burn out. I mean, and I meet people who are already almost at that stage, like, I'm ready to give up on my business. I'm ready to, if this is what I have to do in order to be successful, and that's why people like you and I describe, when we've found teachers, that ilk, it feels like an oasis in the desert. It's like, oh my goodness, I was starved for this. So yeah, it's huge. And then when you operate in those ways, lots of business owners are drawn to me and they'll say to me, oh my goodness, I love the way you do business, and and I'm very open about ethical business, because that's what I'm doing. I'm very open about conscious business and ethical marketing and those things. And sometimes I have to remind my clients to tell your people that why you don't do this or why your prices are like this. It's obvious for me to do it because I teach it. But sometimes I have to remind my clients, tell your people, because people are craving in this world, this mad world we live in, people are craving integrity and care and consideration. They're so tired of being manipulated and lied to and objectified. So yeah, it's
I'm just
important.
trying to see if there's anything that I've planned to ask you that I haven't. I just want like to finish maybe on asking you maybe to share a story of where you've helped someone with your particular way, where this really helped transform a client's experience, somebody's business. Did you have any story you'd like to tell us about that?
Yeah, good question. It's interesting. I have a wonderful client who I've worked with for years, and when she came along, the business wasn't sustainable. She wasn't making enough money. I think her income that year was 16,000. I spoke to her recently and she's in six figures now. And it's been years, that hasn't been, I'm not going to sit here and say she worked with me for 6 weeks. She did my group program twice. She worked with me as a one-to-one client for over 2 years. She still does occasional one-to-ones with me now. So this is a journey that has taken 4 or 5 years to go from 16K to, six figures. And one of the things, if I talk to her about that journey, I always talk about there's two main strategies that I always bring people back to is content, providing value through our content, and which you do in spades, and outreach, what I call authentic outreach, having those conversations. And so they were the two things that I've focused on with this client, for years now. She's also a deeply spiritual person. Sometimes people say to me, oh, well, you can only make 6 figures if you're a business coach. And I always think of this client because she's a spiritual coach. She's a spiritual guide. She's wonderful. And she hasn't spent tens of thousands on a fancy website, and she's just put into practice these principles of, creating valuable content, sharing her point of view. She does gift sessions, has done gift sessions consistently, for years now. When people come to her site, you can get a session with her, and her business is thriving. I remember going through finances with her because, I can't take all the credit for her. She's an incredible woman. So I think what I helped her to do was find a way to feel good about business and not be at odds with her spirituality, actually be aligned. And so one of the things I love about this particular client is we have worked on like a business model and financial spreadsheet, and with all her income streams, and targets, and she always has a column for magic.
Say that again, sorry.
She always has a column on her financial for magic. Because there is always magic, because she believes in magic. She's deeply spiritual, and there was, whenever we, as we worked together, there was always money in the magic column. There was always money that came from something that wasn't planned for, or so that client in particular springs to mind, because she's really embraced the generosity aspect of, I think, what I teach, and the being of value and the connection and the conversations, and really rejected all of the other stuff, and she's thrived. And I love that. And the thing about that client and other clients that I see succeed, and clients that don't succeed, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you every client I have get 6 figures, because they don't. And I wrote a piece years ago called, or maybe last year, I can't remember when I wrote it, but called "The One Thing I Can't Teach You About Business." And it's the energy and the intention with which we do all of these things. We do our marketing. And as you've alluded to, there are people out there now who have cottoned on to, oh, if I talk about being of service and I do outreach and say I'm here to help people, I'll get the sale. If you do the strategies that I talk about, but you do it from a place of manipulation and trying to get the sale, it doesn't work. So intention is huge. And that's what
Yeah.
one of the things I love about that particular client is, because her intention has always been so pure. It's worked in a way you can't predict. It's like, how does it work? That, really all she's done is consistently sent a high value newsletter and offered some gift sessions and been in, and rejected the kind of mainstream manipulation, and it's really worked. She's really thrived. So yeah.
So before I ask you to share where people can find you, I thought maybe you want to either you want me to share that, or you want to share, the fact that you offer like a range of programs and products. Do you want to share about that? You want?
Yeah, I mean, I can say a quick word. I mean, I do throughout the year, I do workshops and I have my one-to-one, but once a year around now, at the end of the year, I'm recruiting for my year-long conscious business mastermind, which you know well, and
Yeah.
where I teach everything that we've kind of touched on today, teach my approaches. And yeah, it's open. It's open
Are you
for a
happy for
moment
me
right
to
now.
mention price? Do you want to? Are you happy to mention prices?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's one of the things, actually. That's one of the tactics, hiding the price that we don't do. We
Yeah.
don't like that one. Yeah, it's 140 euro. Don't know what that translates to in pounds, but a bit more, maybe. No, a bit less in pounds. It's less in
In
pounds, isn't
pounds,
it?
it's probably 120,
So yeah,
something like that. Yeah.
a month for
Yeah.
12 months. So it's a small, unlike, some big memberships or masterminds, it's small. It's, typically a group size of 12 or 13 people, mainly women. The
Yeah.
occasional man sneaks in. And we meet weekly, for the year
Yeah.
and work on this stuff
And you
together.
do offer, yeah, I want to mention that because that's how I tried you before I joined your program, is you do offer a workshop that only costs 50 euros.
Yes, the one at the moment I've got, which is my annual business planning workshop.
And so for
Um,
people who want to like dip their toe into seeing whether you're the right person for them, it's a low cost, low
yeah,
risk way to experience how you work. And again, this million years ahead, away from the sort of thing where we're talking
yeah,
about stuff
yeah,
that doesn't, because there's real juicy content, valuable content inside of your workshops,
yeah.
and you teach the same approach that you teach in all of your programs. So Caroline, just before we finish, do you want to share where people can find you?
Yes, probably the best place is my website, which is carolineleon.com, Leon, because people don't always
This
know how
will all
Leon is
be
spelled.
under this video
Yeah.
in the links sharing. Yeah,
But that's probably the best. And joining, I always love to get people into my newsletter, because that's where I give my best advice for free. So signing up there is probably the best way to stay in touch.
lovely.
Um,
Well, thank you very much, Caroline.
Thank you. It's been
Yeah, for
wonderful.
sharing all this important, world-changing practice to have
Thanks,
for
Sam.
to have real conscious business
Yes.
owner grow
Yeah.
their business.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's been lovely. Really great conversation.